in reviewing missing 411 Western United States and in Corpo, rating the disappearances chronicled in the Oregon chapter, a new cluster has emerged, the Three Sisters Cluster. There is a minimum of 3 people who have vanished directly in that wilderness and more from the surrounding region. The disappearances in this cluster, too, are highly unusual in that the victims are rarely ever found. As you read this chapter and start to understand the people involved, you'll start to appreciate the high intellect that most possessed. The people that have disappeared directly in the Three Sisters have all been men, including the documented cases in the missing 41J Western book. It's amazing to me how specific regions of the country, certain clusters, represent a certain type of person. In this incident it is men, other places it's women, while in still others it's boys. The search effort for these people has been phenomenal. In some instances, a small amount of evidence that the person was in the area was recovered. In other cases, the person and all of their camping equipment seemed to vanish. The entire stretch of the Cascades from the California border and up through Canada has had more disappearances than almost any other area in North America. Wilson man, missing 5/31/66, Unk, south of Cave Junction, Oregon. Age at disappearance, 3 years. Cave Junction, Oregon, is located at the far southern end of the state, just on the eastern side of the coastal mountains. This is a SMAB town, just 10 miles from the California border, accessed by using Highway 199. The city sits in Josephine County at the far southeastern edge of the Rogue River National Forest with an eleva tie-in of 1,400 feet. On May 31, 1966, Wilson man was visiting his uncle's, Otha Russell, residence just south of Cave Junction. The boy somehow had wandered away from the garden, and Otha was unable to find him. After Otha and Mrs. Lillian Mann had continuously yelled for the boy in the nearby woods with no success, the Josephine County sheriff was called. The Mann family had moved to their cabin from Sunland, California, 2 months previously. Sunland is a small city just outside Sacramento. The family had 4 children, including Wilson and his twin brother. Tracking dogs brought to the Russell residence appeared to find the boy's scent and followed it to an old logging road that led into dense timber, but then lost it. Sheriff Dean Snyder called for everyone in the community to stop working and assist in the search effort. Airplanes, helicopters, 1,000 searchers, bloodhounds, and residents from California arrived to assist. A June 6 article in the Daily Chronicle made the following statement about the search. FOT. Snyder said that the area within a 10-mile radius of the uncle's home had been searched, and all streams and ditches had been dragged or drained. On June 6, 1966, the Josephine County Sheriff terminated the official search for Wilson man. It had been 7 days of intensive effort by nearly the entire Cave Junction community. Summary. I personally know this area of Oregon very well. I have spent many days backpacking and hiking just a few miles south in California's Preston Peak and Raspberry Lake areas. Just a little further east from my camping location is Devil's Peak. Throughout my research into missing people, I am constantly made aware of odd consistencies in locations and dates, and this case is no different. As I was discovering the articles on Wilson L. came across a June 2, 1966, article in the St. Joseph Gazette with the following headline: 2 boys lost in remote areas, 3 others found. The article described how Larry Jeffrey disappeared on Mount Charleston in Nevada on May 28, 1966. See the Nevada Chapter 4. Larry's story. Only Larry and Wilson's names were mentioned in the article, but it's unusual because of the proximity of dates and the fact neither boy was ever found. It is a very unusual event when children are not located, but to have 2 disappear within 3 days of each other and both not found is that company incidents? An extensive archival search failed to find one article. Rib. ing that Wilson was ever found. He is not listed as missing in any regional or national database.
Keith Zunk.
Missing 10/24/81, Unk, Umatilla National Forest, or age at disappearance, 21 years. Disability. The Umatilla National Forest is located east of the Cascade Range in the northeastern section of the state. In missing 411 Western United States, I documented other disappearances from this region of Oregon. The area can be rugged and thick with woods. News reports indicate that when Keith Zunk was a young boy, he suffered an injury that was debilitating. This injury inhibited his maturity, and as he got older, he was forced to jive in a group home. At the age of 21, Keith was jiving in a home in Walla, Washington. On October 24, 1981, Keith was living in the Stone Creek Lodge group home when the administrators decided to take a group of residents on a mountain hike to Oregon. The group drove to the Umatilla National Forest. News articles at the time indicate that Keith and another resident didn't want to go on the hike.
They
did go down a trail an unspecified distance and eventually were sent back to the vehicle by the counselors on the scene. The two men were not supervised allegedly during the walk back to the vehicles. Once the main group had completed the hike, they returned to the car and found Keith's hiking partner but not Keith. The United States Forest Service and the local sheriff started a massive search. Mrs. Rebecca Carroll, Keith's mother, advised that Keith had the mental age of a 5-year-old at the point when he disappeared. Almost 500 searchers, military, law enforcement, and volunteers scoured the ground and flew the skies looking for
Keith.
At the end of 10 days, the search was eventually called off. Searchers never found a clue of where Keith was. Foker edition. There was no update on Keith's location for almost 30 years. In the summer of 2011, someone found Keith's remains in the Umatilla National Forest. There were no details of where they were found in relationship to where he disappeared. There was an article on June 21, 2012, in the Buffington Post that did explain some of the facts surrounding the recovery. Although Zunk's remains were found last year, officials first did a thorough investigation to ensure the area was not a Native_American burial site. The other issue was that Keith wasn't listed on any national database as a missing person, and thus his DNA was not on file.
Keith had somehow
been declared legally dead in 1983, so all efforts to classify him as a missing person were thwarted. Later in that same article was this statement: because Zunk's remains were incomplete, a cause of death cannot be determined. Whatever the circumstances of how Keith was located, it must have been a needle in the haystack scenario. The minimal remains were sent to a forensic anthropologist and the Oregon State medical examiner for identification. There were not any notations in any news article about the condition of the remains or how many
pieces of the
remains were recovered.
Summary.
This case is in this chapter for a couple of key reasons. This incident represents another disappearance of a disabled person. The person Keith was with was at the proper location. Keith was not at the vehicle. A massive 10-day search finds zero evidence of where the 21-year-old went. The other key point was that Keith was not classified as a missing person. I spoke about this classification in the book Missing 41/Western United States. By classifying someone as legally dead, you are taking his or her name off any missing person's roster. It's as though the incident never occurred.
It really makes me
ponder how many missing cases have disappeared off the books of law enforcement, the National Park Service, and the United States Forest Service by merely claiming someone was legally dead. Darning Sioux. Missing 1110/4/07 p.m. French Peak Creek, Three Sisters Wilderness. Or age at disappearance, 63 years. Daming and Shershio Su emigrated from China to the United States in the late 1980s. The married couple wanted to settle on the western side of the United States and eventually chose Eugene, Oregon. Both were energetic people, and Darning had an advanced education in mathematics and soon landed a job teaching mathematics statistics at the University of Oregon. He held HFS professor job since 1990. Shershio most recently was working in a large electronics company that made memory chips and working 12-hour
days.
Shershio and Darning enjoyed the outdoors and regularly went for wilderness hikes when their days off were compatible. Shershio enjoyed going to Terwilliger Hot Springs near Cougar Reservoir and resting in the water. She had a painful medical condition which the hot springs aided in reducing the pain. Darning was an all-around, athletic and healthy man for 63 years old, and he rode his bike to work every day. His family stated that he did not have any medical issues they knew about. On November 4, 2007, Shershio got up early for her 7 a.m. shift and arrived on time. Darning had the day to himself and told his wife he was going for a day hike near Cougar Reservoir, a 30-mile ride directly east of Eugene on Highway 126, and then a short 1-mile ride south to the reservoir. That area of the lake gets very remote and desolate quickly, and it is just 50 miles north of Crater Lake National Park in the middle of the Cascades. Darning drove to Forest Service Road NF 19, which travels south from Cougar Reservoir. He stopped in a small parking area. Professor Su, pronounced Shu, was smart and athletic and knew he'd need a hiking map if he traveled deep into the forest. He chose Geo Hikes in Northwest Oregon and Southwest Washington, written by William Sullivan. He took the portion of the book he needed and started the hike. Nobody knows exactly where he was at the beginning of the hike, but in the early afternoon, 2 hikers saw Darning at the summit of Olali Mountain, approximately 7 miles from his automobile and at an elevation of 5,500 feet. His car was parked at approximately 2,000 feet. The couple spoke with Darning, and he seemed to be in good spirits as they watched him start down the mountain toward the area of French Peak Creek. The couple followed shortly after. It was 7:15 p.m. that Shershio left her electronics firm and made the 15-minute ride back to her home in Eugene. She arrived to find that Darning wasn't there, and his car was also missing. She called his cell phone, but it had been left in his car. She then started to call her daughter in Portland. Shershio was extremely nervous, and it is at this point that the media told 2 different stories. One stated that she led the Eugene Police Department and reported her husband missing that night. Another states that she waited until the next day to report him missing. In any event, he was reported as a missing person, and searchers started to look in the area for his vehicle. It wasn't long before they found it parked on Forest Service Road 19, just south of Cougar Reservoir. They found half the map book and Darning's leather coat inside. Xin Su, the daughter of Darning and Shershio, immediately came to Eugene from Portland. She told the press that her father was in very good condition for his age, hiked regularly, and if he was not injured, should survive well. The Lane County Sheriff was the primary law enforcement agency that was leading the search for Darning in the Willamette National Forest inside of the Three Sisters Wilderness. The area is extremely rugged, with steep cliffs and very thick and lush woods. The area where he disappeared appears to never have been logged, and is even more thick with vegetation than other surrounding areas. The Lane County Sheriff's Office was assisted by the United States Forest Service, Eugene Police, Benton and Deschutes Sheriff. Search and Rescue, 2 National Guard helicopters, Civil Air Patrol, and the Smith County Rescue Team. There were equestrians, Kers, and planes in the sky, all looking for Darning. There was plenty of water in creeks and rivers in the area for him to stay hydrated and much foliage to eat if he knew the right variety to harvest.
There
Were 100 square miles of wilderness closed to all hikers. While the search was going on, bloodhounds were brought to the location where Darning was last seen, and they couldn't pick up a
scent.
The weather changed dramatically during the search. There was very thick fog coupled with rain and wind that changed to snow. At higher elevations, the fog grounded all air support, and strong winds compromised the canines' efforts. On Tuesday, 3 days after Darning had vanished, search airs thought they might have been following his tracks downhill. They followed these tracks until 3 a.m. Wednesday and lost them in an area called Bear Flats.
Late
In the afternoon, Wednesday, 2 searchers were very deep in the French Peat Creek drainage and found the remaining half of the trail guidebook that Darning was carrying. This was the only clue of where he might have been. Searchers scoured the French Peat area for him and never found another clue. This region is extremely thick with vegetation, and a very small creek was running at the time. After 9 days of exhaustive searching, the Lane County Sheriff IFF advised the public that the efforts to find Darning Sioux had been terminated. Searchers had combed mountainsides, creeks, gullies, and roads. They found nothing substantial but his hiking guide.
Summary.
Darning disappeared in the middle of the Cascade Mountain range and in the middle of one of the largest clusters of missing people on the west coast of the United States. He fits into a special classification of older males that have vanished under very odd circumstances. Refer to Missing 411 Western United States for details on missing people in the Cascades. Damip was an experienced hiker, a brilliant individual who did not have medical problems. He came prepared for the hike by taking a map. The couple he met at the summit on Olallie Mountain stated they thought he was carrying a small backpack, probably with supplies and a coat, just a guess. He told someone where he was traveling and when he'd be back. It does seem extremely odd that his map would be found in the French Peat area. He knew it was his lifeline back to his automobile. You'd think he would have been able to safely travel with it. French Peat Creek is one of the most lush, thick, and toughest areas to walk in the entire area. Odd he would go there. How or what detoured Darning, we will never know. Margaret Mary Kohler. Missing 2/20/11 p.m. Cummins Creek Wilderness, Shuswap National Forest or age at J. Ice appearance, 53 years. 53-year-old Margaret Kohler left her seaside city of Resi, Denke, Waldport, and made the short drive south on Highway 1012, a favorite location. She liked to hike with her 5-year-old Labrador collie mix Roscoe. She drove her 2003 Toyota Sienna minivan south through Yachits, continuing an additional 4.5 miles where she made a left-hand turn onto Cummins Ridge Road. Margaret drove for almost 5 minutes near the end of the road and parked. She took her dog out of the van and Margaret vanished. Ms. Kohler had told a close friend where she was heading for her walk, and the friend had thought she was headed to hike and possibly pick mushrooms. The Ridge Road was a location that Margaret went regularly to walk with Roscoe. Margaret was last seen at her home at noon on February 19th and was reported missing on February 20th. Margaret's friend reported to the sheriff's department that Margaret had taken her dog on a trip to the Cape Perpetua area. Lane and Lincoln County Sheriffs, United States Forest Service, and Oregon State Police all searched for Margaret. Local search and rescue teams worked the area where she was supposedly heading and found nothing. On March 3rd, the United States Forest Service law enforcement officer found Margaret's been on Forest Service Road 1051 in the Cummins Ridge Trail area. The vehicle was unoccupied, and a massive search of the immediate area failed to find Margaret or Roscoe. Bloodhounds were brought to Margaret's vehicle and failed to find a scent they could track. Yachits Fire District personnel and Marion County sheriffs joined forces already looking for Margaret along the trail. On March 5th, just 2.2 air miles south of Ma, RG3, Rhett's vehicle. Searchers found Roscoe walking in the area of 10 Mile Creek. The dog was in good health and was taken by Lincoln County Animal
Control.
Deputies attempted to get Roscoe to lead them to Margaret, but it did work. Margaret Kohler has not been found.
Summary.
The area where Margaret disappeared is in the Cummins Creek Wilderness in the Siuslaw National Forest. This area has steep mountains with extremely thick vegetation. This region of the Oregon coast can get anywhere from 40 to 100 inches of rain annually. Parts of the forest in this area can almost appear like a rainforest. The road where Margaret's vehicle was found is just south of Neptune State Scenic Viewpoint and a coastal area called Devil's Churn. This isn't an area that gets significant vehicular traffic, and it would take a local to know where the road led that Margaret was taking. Friends of MS. Kohler indicated she knew the region well and went to pick truffles and walk her dog there regularly. It would seem unusual that she would get lost, and it would be equal one way odd that she would voluntarily allow her dog to run free. The location where Roscoe was found is 2.2 miles south of the van, but it is a very rough 2.2 miles over a mountain range and into very desolate areas. I have documented several other cases where a subject appears with their dog, and the dog returns but the person is still missing. Steve Litzy. Missing 10/29/11 p.m. Umpqua National Forest, 56 miles east of Roseburg, Oregon. Age at disappearance, 71 years. Steve Litzy was a successful real estate agent for Coldwell Banker Realtors in Paradise, California. Steve and his wife, Suzanne SNYD, lived in a suburb of Paradise but also owned a residence in Elkton, Oregon, which is between Roseburg and Eugene. In early November 2001, Steve went with a friend to the Twin Lakes area of the Umpqua National Forest for a week of hunting. The week didn't go well, and the men decided to make their last day October 29th. The men rose early, grabbed their rifles, and Steve snagged a day pack and placed water and energy bars inside. The men started down toward the trailhead. Both men agreed to hunt on their own and then to meet back at their vehicle later in the day. Steve was last seen 1/8 of a mile down the trail in a small culvert. He was never seen again. The Douglas County Sheriff was notified on October 29 that Steve was missing. The sheriff called the United States Forest Service, National Guard, and a variety of search and rescue
teams.
On October 31st, 8 different bloodhounds were brought into the area to attempt to track Steve. None could find a scent. Helicopters and all-terrain vehicles crisscrossed the trails and roads. Nothing could be found that could be confirmed as belong to Steve. Just days after the search started, snow hit the area and made the search effort extremely difficult. The snow covered any possible tracks and brought the aerial search to a complete halt. After a massive 1-week search effort, the attempt to locate Steve Litzy was abandoned. Summary. Steve was an experienced hunter that went into his day pre-pared. He had supplies, was dressed correctly, told someone where he was going, and knew the area well. Steve had a firearm and knew that if he was in danger to fire off 3 rounds. Nobody ever heard any calls for help. The local sheriff, Forest Service, and National Guard all supplied the normal amount of resources that they dedicate to locating missing people. The location where Steve disappeared has a troubling past.
I
have written about this area extensively in Missing 411 Western United States. This north-south corridor, through the Cascades, has a history of people disappearing and sometimes killing
them.
Crater Lake National Park is just 16 miles south east from the Twin Lakes. The park and its surrounding area have a long history of people vanishing and the majority never being found. I encourage people to go to a computer and Google Earth the area where Steve disappeared. Look at the area that Darning Sioux vanished, and then if you can get a copy of Missing 411 Western United States and start connecting the dots. It won't be difficult. This area of the Oregon Cascades is not as steep, as high, or as rugged as mountains in Colorado, Idaho, or Montana, yet there appears to be more missing people that are never found here than makes logical sense. James Jake Dutton. Missing 6/18/12 Unc. Three Sisters Wilderness. Or age at disappearance, 32 years. As you read the case of Jake Dutton, remember the case of Darning Sioux. The location and facts surrounding the cases are eerily
close.
Jake was a veteran of the United States Coast Guard. He attended a local community college in Eugene and had recently graduated. He was suffering from a long-term disability from a back injury.
He
was a caring son and uncle, and in fact had a planned trip with his nephew just before he disappeared. On June 15, 2012, Jake drove his 1998 blue Nissan pickup to the French Peak Trailhead in the Three Sisters Wilderness east of Eugene. This area is extremely rugged with a long history of hikers that have vanished and never been found. See Missing 411 Western United States. Jake was a competent and diligent hiker. He completed a trail permit and left the paperwork in the United Forest Service box at the trailhead. His permit stated that he would be back to his truck and out of the wilderness by June 18th. On June 28th, Jake had a long-planned trip with his nephew.
He
had agreed to pick him up at Portland International Airport.
When
Jake didn't arrive at the airport, this triggered a series of family events that caused his brother, Chris, to travel to Jake's apartment to
check on his welfare.
Chris did arrive at Jake's apartment and found that he had camping gear and supplies stored and waiting for the trip with his nephew. He found Jake's calendar that showed he had a series of events lined up that he was to accomplish. But Jake was nowhere in sight, nor was his truck. On July 9th, Jake's family filed a missing persons report.
The
family had no idea that Jake had traveled to the wilderness and had no idea where he might be. They knew he was a very responsible man, and it was completely unlike him not to meet his nephew. There was no information on Jake until July 30th. The missing persons report filed on Jake made its way to the United States Forest Service, USFS, who happened to see his abandoned truck in the Mackenzie Pass area near the French Peak Trailhead. The USFS contacted Eugene police, and on July 31st through August 5th, searches were conducted in the wilderness. Canine search teams, hikers, and volunteers from throughout the area looked for Jake. Hikers in the region were questioned to see if they had seen the man. Nobody had any information. In an embarrassing twist for the USFS, Jake's wilderness per MIT, stating the time he was supposed to be out of the wilderness, was ignored. In an article in the August 17, 2012, Register Guard, a USFS spokesperson stated that the permits are just used to monitor the amount of hikers in the wilderness and not to determine if someone was overdue on a trip. They further stated that they did not regularly pick up wilderness permits. Eugene Police Detective Jeff Donaga now has Jake's missing persons case. Detective Donaga has stated that he does not believe that Jake voluntarily disappeared.
Summary:
the history of people disappearing in this region of the Cascades is horrible. I do not believe that a Eugene police detective will understand the number of individuals who have simply vanished and have never been found. Nothing from these people, equipment, clothing has been found. Daming's map was the only item. I always believed that when I completed a wilderness permit, that someone at the USFS was monitoring who was in the wilderness, who was out, and who was overdue. You'd think they would at least contact a family member to ensure that she or he was not alarmed by the 1NGTH of your trip. If the USFS is just using the permits to monitor the load on the wilderness, they should state this on the permit and specifically indicate that if you are overdue on the permit, the USFS will not trigger a search based solely upon that information. Jake is another of a long line of individuals that have disappeared in the Cascades and never been found. Robert Perry Bissell. Missing July 24, 12. Roaring River Wilderness, or age at disappearance, 57 years. The Roaring River Wilderness area is located on the western end of the Mount Hood National Forest. The wilderness is located approximately 15 miles from downtown Portland and an equal number of miles south of the Washington state border.
The wilderness
designation means that no motor vehicle of any type is allowed inside the region, and there is no logging of any old growth
trees.
When you observe the area by air, you'll notice much logging. In the surrounding area, be significant old growth in the designated area. On July 12, 2010, Robert Bissell left his residence on 30th Avenue in Portland and drove his 1989 white Nissan Sentra with distinctive chrome wheel fenders to the trailhead for Shell Rock Lake and the Rock Lakes BAS, just on the outer fringe of the wilderness. Robert took his backpack and his assorted supplies and hiked into an area at Middle Rock Lake. This lake is located between Upper and a Lower Rock Lake, all at elevation points between 4,200 and 4,400 feet. The South Fork of the Roaring River actually starts between Lower and Middle Rock Lakes. Middle Rock Lake is the largest of the three lakes at approximately 1,500 feet long and 600 feet wide at its widest point. Robert placed his tent in a grove of large trees, a very peaceful location. He left the tent, carrying his fishing pole and tackle box, and leaving everything else behind. On July 19th, Robert's brother, Michael, hiked into the area to meet with him and couldn't locate him. He left a note on Robert's Nissan at the trailhead parking lot, asking Hill to contact the family. When Robert didn't call, Michael went back into the wilderness and again found Robert's tent just as he had seen it 5 days earlier. It appeared to have not been touched. The note at the car was still there, so Michael contacted the United States Forest Service and the Clackamas County Sheriff and reported Robert Bissell as a missing person. On July 25th, the Clackamas County Sheriff sent a team into the Middle Rock Lake area. They found Robert's tent and took a photo of it. They found everything in the tent that you'd figure to find for someone spending time in the woods, except for Robert's fishing pole and tackle box. This first day established 11 nonstop days of intense search efforts for Robert. The Clackamas Sheriff was the lead law enforcement agency conducting the search effort and asked the Oregon National Guard to send its helicopter to scout the lake's region by air. The helicopter spent several hours scanning the region and saw nothing unusual. Several teams of bloodhounds searched each of the three lakes and again had no luck in picking up any scent. A total of 20 organizations pounded the lake's area without finding one trace of Robert. The search commander did make a statement about the ruggedness of the terrain. 3 to 4 of the horses used in the search had thrown shoes and had to be removed from the area. Other bears of the mounted posse replaced the horses that were removed. The final total was over 200 people who committed countless hours walking the rocky terrain looking for Robert and finding nothing. Searchers did find one set of campers in the area that did confirm they saw and spoke to Robert, but it had been very early in his trip. No sightings were made later during the fishing excursion. Robert did file a wilderness use permit with the United States Forest Service that indicated that he would be out of the area by July 16th. On August 2, 2010, the following article and statement was published on the OregonLive.com website about the search effort. SGT James Rhodes of the Clackamas County Search and Rescue Unit said Bissell remains listed in the National Missing Persons Database. He said flyers are still being circulated and that the Clackamas County Sheriff will continue to accept tips on his whereabouts.
Summary.
The region where Robert disappeared is some of the densest forests in the Pacific Northwest. The man was an experienced backpacker who enjoyed going solo into the woods, and he had done so many times. He wasn't going to travel across the wilderness on an overnight tour. Nay, he was going fishing at one of the nearby jakes, and this should have been a fairly easy search. Several teams of bloodhounds were brought into the area and couldn't find a scent, which seems highly unusual, since they had located Robert's campsite with his tent still in place. We know that a wild animal didn't attack Robert because there would be a scene of carnage and an overpowering smell of rotten
flesh.
At the very least, searchers would have found his fishing pole and tackle box, neither of which was ever located. Helicopters couldn't find a heat signature, planes could not spot anything unusual in the sky, and ground troops could not locate any footprints in the area. I have written about other unusual disappearances just 10 miles north of Robert's tent in an area named Larch Mountain, missing 411 western United States. The Cascade Mountain Range, starting just north of Medford and traveling north into Washington, has some of the most unusual and troublesome disappearances that we've documented. Ronald Ohm, missing 8/09/12 p.m., Russell Lake, Jefferson Wilderness. Age at disappearance, 52 years. Mount Jefferson, at 10,497 feet in elevation, is the centerpiece of the Mount Jefferson Wilderness area. The Jefferson Wilderness area is almost exactly 20 miles north of the Three Sisters Wilderness, and it is almost exactly north in the same string of mountains. Ronald Ohm was hiking with two friends from the Portland area, and they had hiked up to a ridge above Russell Lake near Mount Jefferson. Ronald was a very experienced hiker and had a tent, sleeping bag, photography equipment, and supplies with him. Ronald's two friends stated that they were going to hike down to the lake and put their camp together, while Ronald stated he wanted to stay on the ridge and take more photos. An August 15, 2012, article on KATU.com had the following statement about Ronald's location. 52-year-old Ronald Ohm was separated from his party near Russell Lake, about 1 mile north of Mount Jefferson, DPU. Ties said. It started to get dark, and Ronald did not arrive at the camp at the lake with his friends. The friends did look for him that night, but he could not be located. The following day, the United States Forest Service and the Marion County Sheriff's Department were notified and started a formal search. The sheriff was notified that Ohm had a medical condition that required daily medication. The path from the ridge where Ronald was taking photos to the point where the camp was at the lake was unmistakable. The lake was in clear view during the walk, and the hike was easily made from the point on the
ridge.
The Marion County Sheriff contacted the Oregon National Guard, and they put helicopters into the air, along with planes from the Civil Air Patrol. There were over 200 ground searchers that worked a grid pattern looking for Ronald. Ronald's family members came to the search headquarters and were present during the 6 days that teams covered the area. At the end of the 6th day, an agreement with the family members was made, and the formal search for Ronald was terminated. Teams did not find any of Ronald's equipment, backpack, hat, camera, sleep ing bag, nothing. One searchers stated that they covered 300 square miles and utilized 3,500 search hours.
Summary.
Ronald was a lone hiker, photographer, and an individual ing medication. He was formally missing near dark of the day he was last seen. He went missing in an area where there are dozens of small lakes in a high-altitude setting with exposed boulders and rocks. A formal 6-day search by National Guard helicopters and Civil Air Patrol produced nothing. Where are these people going? Look at the landscape around Russell Lake. There isn't a lot of vegetation, and it's difficult to get lost from the ridge to the lake. The number of people that have disappeared in this corridor of the Cascades is disturbing. There has been one person to vanish for each of the summer months in 2012, and the last two were over 50 years old and missing approximately 25 miles from each other, both while alone in a wilderness area. I would implore all of you to read Missing 411 Westham United States to get an adequate understanding of all the people that have vanished in the Cascades in the Oregon and Washington areas. I try to steer clear of words that exaggerate a situation, but the Cascades are a dangerous place for whatever reason. Nobody will ever convince me that the single hikers and hunters I have written about just happen to vanish on their own will. Something unusual is happening. People have written to me to explain that the Cascades are a series of volcanoes, both active and inactive, and then ask if the volcanoes could possibly play some role in the disappearances.
I
don't know. I admit that the landscape in the Cascades can be rough, but it isn't as extreme as these disappearances imply.
Much
of the area where the people have vanished is above the timberline, where there isn't that much cover. I have had others write to me to ask if the boulders played some role in the disappearances. I would refer readers to the international chapter on Iceland and read what the folklore states about large rocks and boulders. I would also refer readers back to the other Missing 411 books where I draw parallels between people who have vanished and their vicinity to large rocks and boulders and exposed granite. It can't be ignored. I can personally guarantee two things about me. I would never hike or hunt the Cascades alone. Even if I was in those mountains, I would be heavily armed and carry a personal transponder. While some of you may claim that I am trying to hype this situation, I don't need to. Anyone with any degree of common sense can read the numbers of people I have documented, the strange conditions under which they vanished, and stranger conditions under which some have been found, and realize something quite unusual is happening. Everyone involved in the Canam Missing project has deep compassion for the missing and their families, and we understand that the vast majority has never been exposed to what we are explaining in our books. We hope that the exposure given to the Ronald Ohm case and others listed in this book somehow reveals what is happening and brings closure to the families.